Welcome, dear listener. I am Caleb, and tonight I will guide you on a journey of deep relaxation and quiet transformation. Allow your body to sink even deeper into comfort as all the tension from your day gently melts away. Feel safe and embraced as if you were in a calm and protected place. Take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Why? Because this way, every night, you'll have access to stories created to speak directly to your subconscious mind. Stories that help you attract prosperity, open new paths, and transform your mindset while you sleep. Each video here is an opportunity to plant seeds of abundance that over time bloom into real results in your life. Now, let your breathing slow down. Let your muscles relax completely. As I tell you this story, every word will plant seeds of prosperity deep within your subconscious. You don't need to focus or analyze. Just listen and allow the story to flow through you like a gentle river of golden abundance. The soft gray light of dawn slipped through the wooden shutters of a small cabin on the edge of a quiet lake. The water outside rippling with the faintest movement of the early wind. And inside the cabin, a man named Elisha slowly opened his eyes, blinking once, twice, as if awakening from a dream he could not quite remember, his body sinking slightly into the mattress as he exhaled. Feeling the weight of the blankets pressing gently against him, he turned his head to the side and watched the faint glow of the morning mist hovering outside the window, his breathing slow, calm, steady. And he stayed like that for several minutes, not moving, listening to the distant sound of a bird somewhere in the pine trees and the occasional soft splash of a fish in the lake. Finally, he stretched his legs under the blanket and let his right foot slip out into the cool air, his toes brushing the wooden floor before finding the edge of his slippers. He pulled the other foot out, feeling the chill on his skin, and stood slowly, the floorboards creaking softly under his weight. He walked to the small bathroom and flicked the light switch, the pale yellow glow filling the room, and he stared into the mirror above the sink, noticing the faint lines under his eyes, the dark circles that told stories of late nights and quiet worries. He leaned closer and let the water run from the faucet, listening to the steady trickle, then splashed his face. The cold water shocking him awake, drops running down his neck. He took the towel and pressed it gently against his skin. Inhaling the faint smell of clean cotton, he brushed his teeth slowly, each stroke deliberate, his eyes fixed on his reflection, and he combed his hair with unhurried motions, the wooden comb gliding through each strand. The narrator's voice appeared softly, like a whisper in the corner of the mind, saying that life often begins to change in moments like this. When you choose to notice the simple things, when you choose to see yourself clearly, because prosperity begins with awareness. Then the voice faded, and Elisha opened a small window above the sink, letting the crisp air in, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. He walked into the tiny kitchen where the coffee pot had already begun to bubble, a faint gurgling sound mixing with the quiet morning. He picked up his favorite ceramic cup, slightly chipped at the edge, and poured the dark liquid. Steam curling into the air, he lifted it to his lips, feeling the warmth against his face, and took a slow sip, letting the bitter taste settle on his tongue. He leaned against the wooden counter, staring out the window at the fog rolling across the lake. A pair of ducks gliding silently across the water, and for a moment he felt a stillness a space inside him that had been waiting to open. He placed the cup down, put on his thick wool sweater, and stepped outside onto the small porch, the wooden planks cold under his slippers. He could hear the faint rustle of leaves, the soft hum of the wind through the trees, and he took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill his lungs. He whispered to himself a soft thank you, though he was not entirely sure for what. Just a thank you for being here, alive in this quiet moment. And the narrator returned, gentle and calm, reminding him that gratitude is the first key to unlocking the invisible doors of abundance. That every quiet thank you plants a seed in the unseen garden of life. And he stood there a while longer, sipping his coffee, feeling the cool breeze on his face, the warmth of the cup in his hands, the solid wood beneath his feet, until the day began to slowly awaken around him. The sun had already climbed high above the hills when Elijah decided to leave the cabin for a walk into the small town that rested on the other side of the lake. He dressed slowly, choosing a pair of dark trousers and a soft flannel shirt with faint green stripes, buttoning each button with careful attention as if every movement mattered. He slipped on his worn leather boots, feeling the stiff creak of the soles against the floor, and then reached for his coat hanging by the door, the scent of pine and rain still clinging to the fabric. He stepped outside and locked the cabin behind him, his footsteps soft on the gravel path that led toward the bridge crossing the lake. The air was fresh but warmer than the early morning, carrying the smell of wet leaves and distant wood smoke from the houses in the valley. He walked slowly, his eyes tracing the patterns of ripples on the water, noticing how the sun reflected off the surface like tiny sparks of gold, each one flickering for a brief second before disappearing again. And he listened to the faint chirp of birds hidden in the branches, the soft buzz of a dragonfly as it darted past his shoulder. He paused halfway across the bridge, resting his hands on the wooden railing, and gazed down at his reflection in the water. The image rippled gently, the sunlight breaking it into fragments, and the narrator's voice emerged, low and calm. Sometimes prosperity hides in reflection, not in the reflection of mirrors or water, but in the reflection of thoughts. When you pause long enough to see yourself, truly see yourself, the world begins to respond to that awareness. The voice faded, and Elijah took a deep breath, continuing his walk. The road leading into the small town, lined with wild flowers, bending slightly in the breeze, their colors soft and delicate, pale yellows and lilacs and whites. He reached the first cobblestone street, and the sound of his boots against the uneven stones echoed softly through the still air. A bakery stood at the corner, its windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside, and the scent of fresh bread and pastries wrapped around him like a gentle blanket. He pushed the door open, and a small bell chimed. The shop was quiet. Only one elderly woman arranging loaves behind the counter. She greeted him with a nod and a smile. He returned the smile and walked slowly along the shelves, letting his fingers brush the wooden surfaces. He chose a small, round loaf, still warm, and a jar of golden honey that caught the sunlight streaming through the window. He placed them on the counter, paid with a soft thank you, and stepped back into the street, the bread warm in his hands. He found a bench near the small fountain in the town square, the water trickling steadily, birds hopping near the edge to drink. He tore a piece of the bread, dipped it into the honey, and chewed slowly, savoring the simple sweetness, the warmth. Spreading through him, he leaned back and let his eyes drift over the quiet scene. A young boy chasing a dog, a man on a bicycle carrying a basket of vegetables, an old couple walking arm in arm under the shade of a tree. And for a moment, the entire world felt like it was breathing in harmony with him. The narrator returned, soft and slow. Sometimes the path to abundance is built in these unnoticed moments, when you give yourself permission to pause, to taste, to breathe, to be, and with every quiet acknowledgement, life expands its silent generosity toward you. Elijah finished his bread and honey slowly, brushed the crumbs from his hands, and stood, walking through the streets until he reached the edge of town, where a small hill overlooked the fields beyond. He climbed it step by step, feeling the pull in his legs, the wind brushing against his face, and when he reached the top, he sat in the grass, the scent of earth and sun-warmed plants surrounding him. He closed his eyes and whispered again, almost without meaning to, "Thank you for this, for now, for what is coming." And the wind seemed to carry his words far into the sky, leaving behind a sense of quiet fulfillment he could not yet explain. The sun began to lower behind the hills as Elijah returned to the small path that curved along the river, the sky slowly shifting from soft blue to pale orange, and the light catching the tops of the trees like golden fire. He walked slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel as he followed the water's edge, listening to the soft murmur of the river as it flowed steadily. Reflecting the fading sky, he paused to watch the ripples curve around the rocks, the reflections of the clouds breaking into fragments. The cool breeze brushed against his face and carried the faint smell of wet earth and distant wood smoke from chimneys in the valley. He saw a small wooden pier and decided to sit at its edge, lowering himself slowly until his feet hovered just above the water. He leaned forward and dipped his fingers into the river, the cold sensation tingling through his skin and making him shiver slightly. He let the water drip from his hand and watched the droplets fall back into the surface, forming tiny expanding circles, and then the narrator's voice emerged softly, almost blending with the whisper of the water. Prosperity is like the ripples you create when you touch life with awareness. It spreads quietly and widely, even when you do not yet see where it will reach. The voice faded as Elijah leaned back on his hands, gazing at the darkening sky, the first faint stars beginning to appear. He stayed like that for a long time, breathing slowly until a soft rustle in the trees drew his attention. A family of deer emerged from the forest edge, moving with quiet grace toward the river to drink. He held still, watching their delicate movements, the way their ears twitched and their eyes glimmered in the fading light. The world felt hushed, as if it respected this small, sacred moment. Elijah slowly stood and began to walk along the riverside trail again, the last of the sunlight fading behind the hills. He eventually came across a small wooden bridge that crossed the river. The planks creaked under his weight, and he paused in the center to rest his elbows on the railing, watching the dark water flow beneath him, tiny specks of reflected starlight flickering on its surface. He could hear an owl calling in the distance, its voice echoing softly through the trees. and he whispered to himself, "Thank you for this day. Thank you for what I see and what I do not yet see." His voice barely louder than the river. He continued walking until he reached a small clearing where an old stone bench waited under a large tree. He sat down, feeling the cool stone under his legs, and tilted his head back to watch the stars appear one by one. The narrator returned, calm and low. Sometimes the universe responds to gratitude spoken in whispers. It is not the volume that brings abundance. It is the sincerity of the heart that allows the invisible to take form. Elijah closed his eyes, breathing in deeply. Letting the cool night air fill his chest, he felt his shoulders relax, the tension of the day fading away. He opened his eyes again and noticed fireflies beginning to glow among the grass and the branches. Small points of warm light drifting in slow, gentle arcs. He smiled faintly, leaning forward and resting his chin in his hands. He watched them dance in silence, the rhythm of their lights matching the calm beat of his heart, and a sense of peace settled over him like a soft blanket. The river continued its endless song in the background, a lullaby for anyone who listened long enough. Elijah stayed there until the first chill of night made him shiver. Then he stood and began to walk back toward the cabin. Each step deliberate, the path dim but visible under the pale glow of the rising moon. He could hear his own footsteps on the soft ground, the distant call of the owl, the hum of the river fading as he moved away. And he thought to himself, without speaking, "I am ready, ready for the quiet wealth that grows from within." And as he reached the cabin door and stepped inside, the narrator whispered one last reflection for the evening. Wealth does not always arrive with noise. It comes to those who are willing to slow down, to listen, and to plant seeds in the unseen soil of their own mind. He lit a small lantern, set it by the window, and sat by the bed, feeling the warmth of the soft yellow glow on his skin. And slowly, without hurry, he let his eyes drift to the reflection in the glass, seeing himself and the stars together in one frame, and for the first time. He believed that tomorrow could hold more than he had ever allowed himself to imagine. The first light of dawn crept gently into the cabin through the thin curtains, painting the wooden floor with soft gold. As Elijah slowly opened his eyes, he lay still for a few moments, feeling the warmth of the blanket against his skin, hearing the faint rustle of leaves outside and the distant murmur of the river. His breathing was slow and steady, and he noticed the subtle rhythm of his own heart, as if the world had slowed down to greet him. He stretched one arm toward the bedside table and touched the smooth wood, grounding himself in the moment. Then he sat up slowly, the blanket sliding off his shoulders, the cool morning air brushing against his face. He rubbed his eyes gently and let his feet find the small wool rug on the floor, enjoying the contrast between the softness and the slight chill. He slipped into his sandals and rose, his body moving with deliberate slowness, every gesture unhurried, as though he had all the time in the world. He walked to the window and pulled the curtains aside, letting the morning lights spill into the room outside. Mist curled above the grass and drifted over the river. The trees glistened with dew, and the first rays of sunlight sparkled like scattered diamonds on the leaves. Elijah opened the window, and the crisp scent of wet earth, pine, and fresh air filled the room. He leaned out slightly, closing his eyes, feeling the gentle breeze against his face, and a soft smile appeared without him thinking. He whispered to himself, "Thank you, not for anything in particular, just thank you." And in that whisper, the narrator's voice returned like a calm stream. This is how prosperity begins, not in coins or paper, but in the quiet acknowledgement of life's gift. The universe listens to gratitude spoken in the language of the heart. The voice faded as Elijah walked toward the small wooden bathroom, the floorboards creaking softly under his steps. He turned the handle and heard the quiet rush of water fill the basin. He splashed his face with the cold water and inhaled sharply, his senses waking fully, droplets running down his neck. He looked into the small mirror and saw his own reflection with gentle curiosity, noticing the softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He brushed his teeth slowly, the sound of bristles mingling with a distant birdsong outside. He rinsed, patted his face with a worn towel, and combed his hair in slow strokes. Watching the strands settle neatly, he felt a strange, calm satisfaction in these simple acts. When he finished, he returned to the small kitchen and prepared his breakfast, cracking 2 eggs into a pan, the sizzle filling the air, the aroma mingling with the scent of freshly brewed coffee from the machine he had set the night before. He poured the coffee into his cup, lifted it with both hands, and inhaled the rising steam as if it were the fragrance of a quiet blessing. He sat at the small table by the window, eating slowly, chewing each bite with awareness, his eyes wandering to the misty morning landscape outside. And the narrator spoke again, slow and steady. When you honor the small moments, you plant invisible seeds of wealth. They grow in silence, in patience, in faith that life can align with your inner calm. Elijah nodded unconsciously, as if agreeing with a voice he could barely hear. He finished his breakfast, washed the plate with warm water, and dried his hands carefully. Then he stepped outside onto the small wooden porch. The world was waking. Around him, a bird landed on the railing, tilting its head as if curious, and the river shimmered in the distance under the rising sun. Elijah sat on the porch step and simply watched, his breathing in sync with the gentle rhythm of the morning. The narrator whispered one more reflection: prosperity is patient. It visits the hearts that are ready to notice, and you, listener, are learning to notice. Your mind is quietly opening to the wealth that life has always wanted to offer. He let the voice fade, and the world spoke again in its soft, natural language. The wind in the trees, the call of a distant bird, the hush of water, and Elijah simply let himself be. Elijah closed the wooden door behind him and stepped into the fresh air. The path leading from the cabin down toward the small village was still damp from the night rain, and each step released the scent of earth and leaves. He walked slowly, his sandals making soft sounds against the ground, his hands tucked into his pockets, feeling the cool air touch his skin. The sun was higher now, filtering through the branches and painting the world with golden patches of light. He noticed the way tiny drops of water clung to spiderwebs between the bushes, glittering like jewels, and he paused to watch them, letting the moment linger until a soft breeze shook them free. He continued down the path, hearing distant voices from the village, the rhythmic clink of metal from the blacksmith's shop, the occasional laugh of a child, and the faint ringing of a bell from the old clock tower. As he entered the village, he saw the bakery door open. warm lights spilling onto the street, and the smell of fresh bread wrapped around him like a soft blanket. He stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming, and the baker, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, greeted him with a gentle nod. Elijah smiled and asked softly for a loaf of bread, watching her carefully wrap it in paper, her hands moving with a grace that only comes from years of quiet practice. He paid her with a few coins, their light clink echoing in the cozy room, then stepped back outside, holding the bread close as if it were a small treasure. The narrator's voice flowed in like a breeze. Prosperity often arrives in humble shapes, in bread warm from the oven, in the small exchanges where kindness is the true currency. And when you feel grateful for these moments, you're already rich. The voice faded as Elijah walked to the village square, where he sat on a wooden bench beneath a tall oak tree. He broke a small piece of the bread and tasted it, the crust crisp, the inside soft and warm. He chewed slowly, letting the flavor stay on his tongue, watching the simple life of the village unfold. A boy ran past chasing a red ball. A woman hung white sheets that swayed gently in the wind. An old man fed pigeons who fluttered and cooed in delight. Elijah leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the sun on his face, the sounds of life filling his ears. He thought about how these simple, unnoticed details carried a quiet beauty. He opened his eyes and decided to walk toward the small river that curved past the village. The water shimmered in the afternoon light, and he crouched by the edge, dipping his fingers into the cold current. Ripples spreading outward in soft circles. He watched a leaf float by, spinning slowly as the water carried it away, and the narrator returned, soft and calm. Wealth flows the way water does, gentle yet persistent. It goes where it is welcomed. And when your heart opens with gratitude, opportunities drift toward you like leaves on the river. Elijah let the reflection settle in his mind as he followed the path along the riverbank, the smell of wet grass and wildflowers rising with each step. He passed a shepherd leading a small group of goats, their bells jingling softly, and he greeted the man with a nod. The shepherd smiled and lifted a hand in quiet acknowledgement. Elijah felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, as if the simple connection had touched something deep inside him. He reached a small wooden bridge and stopped to lean on the rail, watching fish dart below the surface, sunlight breaking into dancing patterns on the water. The breeze carried the scent of pine mixed with the faint aroma of distant cooking fires from the village. He stood there for a long while, letting the rhythm of the world slow his thoughts. The narrator whispered again, "Abundance does not rush. It arrives like the slow unfolding of a quiet day, steady and certain. And those who learn to wait with a peaceful heart always find themselves blessed in ways they cannot yet see." Elijah inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the fresh air, and exhaled as if releasing old worries into the wind. He turned from the bridge and began to walk back toward the cabin, the paper-wrapped bread still in his hand. And though nothing extraordinary had happened, he felt lighter, as if life itself had quietly opened a new door. Elijah returned to the cabin as the light of the afternoon began to soften, the sun now low in the sky, painting the horizon with soft streaks of orange and pink. He placed the loaf of bread gently on the wooden table and removed his sandals. Feeling the cool floor beneath his feet, he walked slowly to the window and pushed it open, letting the gentle evening air flow inside, carrying with it the scent of pine trees and distant smoke from village chimneys. He stood for a long moment, simply breathing, watching the clouds shift into delicate shapes. He walked to the small kitchen, filled a clay cup with fresh water, and drank slowly. Feeling the coolness slide down his throat, he rinsed the cup, set it upside down to dry, and then decided to light a small oil lamp on the table. The golden flame flickered softly, casting warm shadows on the walls. Elijah sat down on the simple chair and looked at the flame, the gentle dance of light and shadow somehow calming the rhythm of his thoughts. The narrator's voice entered softly. In the quiet moments of your life, the seeds of wealth are watered. For when your mind finds peace, it makes space for new ideas. And those ideas will one day bloom into opportunities you never imagined. The voice drifted away, leaving only the soft crackle of the flame. Elijah stood and walked to the small wooden wardrobe, choosing a clean shirt, light and soft against his skin. He changed slowly, folding his old shirt carefully and placing it on the chair. He walked to the small wash basin, filled it with cool water, and splashed his face, feeling the refreshing shock of the evening air mixing with the wetness on his skin. He wiped his face with a soft cloth and looked at his reflection in the slightly worn mirror. He noticed the faint relaxation in his eyes, as if the day had taken away invisible weight. He smiled gently to himself, a rare and quiet smile. He returned to the table and tore a piece of the bread, chewing slowly, each bite grounding him in the present. He spread a little honey he had kept in a small jar, the sweetness filling his mouth as the golden light of the lamp surrounded him. Outside, the first evening crickets began their song, a slow and steady rhythm, blending with a whisper of the wind moving through the leaves. Elijah decided to step outside onto the porch, carrying the lamp with him. He placed it on the wooden railing and leaned against the post, watching the sky grow darker as the first stars appeared, one by one, soft and shy against the deepening blue. He listened to the world settling, a dog barking faintly in the distance, the river flowing far beyond the trees, a single owl calling somewhere in the hills. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, letting his shoulders drop. The narrator's voice returned like the gentle night air. True prosperity begins in the pauses, in the spaces where nothing seems to happen, but your heart grows quiet. Because a quiet heart can hear the whispers of the universe, and those whispers always guide you to abundance. Elijah lifted his gaze to the stars, tracing invisible paths between them. He remembered how the old man in the village had once said that every star is a seed of hope, and that those who keep their hearts open will always find light. He stayed outside until the night embraced the hills completely, and the lamp's golden glow became a small island of warmth in the darkness. He whispered a soft thank you to no one in particular, maybe to life itself, maybe to the unseen forces that guide the days, and then stepped back into the cabin, closing the door gently, the sound of the wooden latch clicking like a punctuation to a perfect day. He blew out the lamp, lay down on the bed, and stared at the ceiling in the darkness, the faint sound of crickets carrying him toward an almost dreamlike state. And in the quiet of the night, he felt that life was gently preparing him for something he could not yet name, but he knew it would be good. Elijah lay in his simple bed as the cabin rested in deep silence. The night had wrapped the hills in a dark velvet cloak, and the faint song of crickets was the only companion to his slow, steady breathing. He felt the fabric of the sheet under his fingertips, slightly rough yet comforting, and he traced its edges absent-mindedly as his eyes grew heavier. He turned his head to the left and saw the window reflecting the pale glow of the moon, a silver circle suspended over the stillness of the world. He slowly got up, walked barefoot across the cool wooden floor, and opened the window just a little wider, letting the night air drift in. It carried the faint smell of damp earth, pine resin, and distant smoke from a fire that someone in the village had probably just fed. He leaned on the window frame and let his gaze wander over the quiet forest. The outlines of the trees blending into the sky, the stars shimmering like distant seeds of light, and he breathed deeply, feeling the air expand his chest and then leave in a soft exhale. He whispered a few words to himself, a gratitude he barely needed to understand, then turned back to the bed, slipped under the sheets, and let his body sink into the mattress. The narrator's voice returned, calm and slow, almost like a lullaby. Now, as you rest in this quiet night, imagine the seeds of your thoughts being planted in the soft soil of your mind. Each thought of gratitude, each thought of worthiness, each thought of quiet joy is a seed that will grow into the wealth of your life. Let them rest there. Let them be watered by your calm breathing. In and out, softly, your mind is a garden, and tonight you are planting abundance, peace, and prosperity. Elijah's eyelids fluttered closed as if following the voice, and the story continued in whispers. Every challenge you have ever faced was simply preparing you for this moment of alignment. Every step you have taken, every quiet choice to notice, to breathe, to be, has led you here. And as you sleep, your subconscious is learning, gently, to allow good things into your life, to receive without resistance, to trust that you are worthy of the opportunities that are already moving toward you. Imagine now a soft golden light flowing over your head, down your shoulders, down your arms and chest, a warm light that carries the energy of wealth and serenity. It fills your body, your heart, and your mind. Every cell remembers that you are enough, that life is abundant, that what you need is already on its way. You do not have to chase it. You only have to allow it. Elijah turned slightly in his sleep, his body fully surrendering. The narrator's voice now flowing like a river, quiet and smooth. Tonight, you reprogram your mind for prosperity, for peace, for a life that flows with ease. Repeat softly in your heart, even if you do not speak, I am safe, I am worthy, I am ready. Abundance comes to me, and as these words settle in your mind, they take root, they grow quietly, just like the stars grow brighter in the night sky, and by morning you will awaken with a lighter heart, a clearer mind, and a life just a little more open to miracles. Now, if you are still awake, leave a comment saying I am awake, so I know you made it this far. But if your eyes are already heavy and you are floating towards sleep, just allow it, and if you are awake, we can begin another story, another soft journey, one step deeper into peace, one step closer to the life of quiet, prosperity that has been waiting for you all along. Now breathe, rest, and receive. It was a cold and misty dawn on the outskirts of a quiet European village. The year was 1805, and inside a modest military tent lit only by a dim oil lamp, Napoleon Bonaparte slowly opened his eyes, the canvas above him slightly swaying with the wind. He remained still for a moment, feeling the stiffness in his back from the hard camp bed and the cool air that touched his face. Outside, the faint sound of soldiers moving and horses snorting mixed with a distant crackling of a fire. He took a slow, deep breath, letting the smell of damp earth and smoke enter his senses. Then he pushed the rough blanket aside and sat up. His boots waiting neatly by the bed, he placed his feet on the ground and felt the icy touch of the wooden floor beneath his socks. He leaned forward, laced his boots carefully, and stood, his shadow long against a tent wall. He walked to the small metal basin where the water was almost frozen. He cupped his hands, splashed his face, and the cold struck him awake, trickling down his neck. He picked up a small cloth and dried himself with slow, precise movements, his reflection faintly visible in a polished bronze plate propped against the table. He noticed his tired eyes, but also the unshakable determination that lived there. He combed his dark hair with deliberate care, straightened his simple military coat, and stood silently for a moment, feeling the weight of the day that was about to begin. And then the narrator's voice entered softly. Sometimes the path to greatness begins in the quiet rituals of the morning, in the simple act of preparing yourself as if the world is already yours. The voice faded as Napoleon reached for his gloves and stepped outside a tent, the chill of the morning wrapping around him, mist rolling over the fields. He walked slowly toward the line of soldiers gathering near the edge of the camp. Nodding to each as they greeted him with respect, he paused by the fire where a kettle of coffee boiled, took the tin cup offered to him, and let the warmth travel through his hands, sipping slowly as he watched the first light of the sun pierce the fog. The smell of wet grass, leather, and smoke filled the air, and for a moment the world seemed still. Napoleon closed his eyes and listened to the distant birds and the soft murmur of the camp waking up. And then the narrator whispered again, "Prosperity is born from vision, from the ability to see the victory before it is even on the horizon." Napoleon opened his eyes and looked toward the hills, imagining the map of the coming battles in his mind, seeing not the mist and mud, but the glory that awaited him. He handed the cup back to the soldier, adjusted his coat, and began to walk along the rows of men, his boots leaving shallow prints in the damp earth. Each step steady, deliberate, as if he were already marching into history. The wind brushed against his face and carried the scent of opportunity, though only he could sense it, and deep within, the seed of his next triumph quietly bloomed. Napoleon walked slowly along the muddy rows of the camp, his boots making a soft, squelching sound with each step. The soldiers stood straighter as he passed, some adjusting their belts, others clutching their muskets with both hands. He nodded to a young man whose uniform was slightly crooked, and the soldier immediately fixed it. Napoleon's sharp eyes missed nothing. The mist still clung to the ground, curling around the horses' legs as they snorted and stamped their hooves. The faint jingle of bridles and the distant clatter of metal pots created a rhythm that felt almost like the heartbeat of the army. He stopped near a cluster of cannons, their dark iron bodies slick with dew. He ran a gloved hand along the cold metal and felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. He knew that every detail mattered, every rope tied, every wheel checked. could be the difference between victory and defeat. He turned to the officer nearby and quietly gave an order to inspect the fuses again. Then he continued walking toward the edge of the camp where the land sloped gently down to a foggy valley. Napoleon stood there for a moment, his hands clasped behind his back, the wind lifting the edges of his coat. He looked over the hills, imagining the enemy beyond the mist, the map of strategy unfolding in his mind like a chessboard. And then the narrator's voice entered softly. True prosperity is not a gift from fate. It is a reward for those who prepare, those who observe before they act. Napoleon breathed deeply, inhaling the smell of wet soil and distant smoke, and in his mind he already saw the moves he would make, the choices that would bring him closer to victory. He turned and walked back toward the soldiers, stopping to watch a group practicing their drills. The synchronized clack of rifles and the sharp commands of the sergeant filled the morning air. He approached a young soldier who fumbled his movement and placed a steadying hand on the man's shoulder, speaking softly but firmly. The soldier nodded, his fear melting into focus. Napoleon moved on, his steps measured, his gaze unwavering, and the narrator returned. Greatness is built in these quiet moments when no one is watching, when you shape yourself and those around you to be ready for the opportunities that others cannot yet see. The mist began to lift, revealing the first rays of sunlight touching the hills, and Napoleon felt the warmth on his face, a sign that the day, like destiny, was ready to unfold under his command. Napoleon entered the main command tent slowly, the flap of the canvas swaying with a morning breeze as he held it open just long enough to let in a stream of pale light. The scent of damp earth and faint smoke followed him inside. The interior of the tent was lit by a single lantern. On the wooden table, its soft glow illuminating the large map spread across the surface, weighted at the corners by stones and a half-empty tin cup of cold coffee. He removed his gloves carefully, placing them beside the compass, and leaned forward with both hands on the table, his eyes scanning every hill, river, and road marked on the map. He traced a route with his finger, stopping at a narrow bridge. He had memorized from previous reports the muffled sound of distant horses and occasional shouts of soldiers. Practicing their drills reached him through the canvas walls. Napoleon adjusted a small wooden figurine on the map, representing his cavalry, and whispered to himself, barely audible, as he calculated the timing of every move, every hour, every mile. He turned to a second map pinned to a board on the wall, this one showing supply lines and villages. He stared at it for a long moment, then picked up a piece of chalk and drew a subtle curve where he wanted the wagons to move. He stepped back, hands behind his back, and breathed deeply. And then the narrator's voice returned, soft and slow. Prosperity in life is not just about wealth. It is about seeing the paths no one else sees, like rivers under the fog, and trusting your preparation to guide you. Napoleon closed his eyes for a moment, envisioning the movements as if they were already happening, his men advancing the cannons, firing in perfect rhythm, the enemy caught unaware. He opened his eyes and felt a calm certainty settle over him. He picked up the tin cup, drank the last sip of bitter cold coffee, and smiled faintly to himself. He reached for a quill and began to write instructions in his neat, deliberate hand, each word measured, precise. He sealed the orders and handed them to an aide who entered quietly. The young officer saluted and left. Napoleon turned back to the map, noticing a tiny detail he had almost missed, a small forest near the valley's edge. He imagined using it as a shield for his artillery. And the narrator's voice returned again. Success is not magic. It is the result of looking deeper, of noticing the small details that everyone else ignores. Napoleon picked up his coat, draped it over his shoulders, and stepped outside. The sunlight now brighter, warming the camp and revealing the distant shapes of hills that had been hidden by the fog. He inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of command and the quiet thrill of knowing that the future favored those who prepared for it in silence. Napoleon walked slowly along the line of soldiers, the muddy ground squelching under his polished boots. Each step measured and quiet as the men straightened their backs and tightened their grips on their muskets. The morning sun filtered through. Thin clouds glinting off bayonets and damp helmets. He kept his hands behind his back, his sharp eyes scanning every face, every stance. He noticed the tension in the shoulders of a young recruit and stopped, leaning slightly forward, his voice calm but firm as he asked the soldier his name. The young man stammered, and Napoleon simply nodded, adjusting the strap of the soldier's musket with precise hands before moving on. He passed by the artillery, the heavy wheels of the cannons still wet from the night rain, and ran his fingers along the cold metal, then tapped it twice with his knuckles. Listening to the hollow echo, he paused and took a long breath, looking at the endless rows of tents, smoke rising from campfires where some men warmed their hands. And then the narrator's voice slipped in softly. Discipline is the quiet architecture of prosperity. Without it, even the greatest talent or the boldest dream will crumble under the weight of chaos. Napoleon stopped at a small group, cleaning their rifles. He crouched down, taking one in his hands, disassembling it. With swift, practiced motions, his fingers working silently as the soldiers watched in awe. Then he reassembled it and handed it back, a faint smile crossing his face as he saw their renewed focus. He continued his walk, pausing at the cavalry, where horses snorted softly and stamped their hooves in the wet dirt. He patted one of the horses on the neck, feeling its warmth, its readiness. He whispered something inaudible and then straightened. Turning toward the officers who had followed him at a distance, he spoke in a measured tone about preparation, about the importance of knowing one's role without question. And as his words traveled down the line, the narrator's voice merged with his. Prosperity comes to those who practice consistency in the unseen hours, in the cold mornings, in the repetitive motions that most abandon. Napoleon resumed his slow walk back to the command tent, his coat trailing slightly behind him, his mind already envisioning the battle as if it were a game of patience, a series of choices earned through years of quiet discipline and sharp observation. The camp echoed with the sound of distant drills, and he felt the day bending to his will, brick by brick, moment by moment. Napoleon sat alone in his command tent, the flickering light of a single lantern casting long shadows over the canvas walls. The smell of damp earth mixed with the faint scent of burning oil. He rested his elbows on the wooden table. Maps spread out before him like rivers of possibility, his fingers tracing the edges of each route, each town, each battlefield. The distant murmur of the camp felt far away. Only the occasional neigh of a horse or the crackle of a dying fire reminded him of life beyond the thin walls. He leaned back in the wooden chair, the leather of his coat creaking softly, and stared at a map pinned with small iron markers, each representing men who trusted him without question. His eyes narrowed in thought. Then the narrator's voice drifted in like a soft echo. Prosperity is often born in solitude, in the silent moments where no one is watching, where only your mind and your resolve shape the world you will soon touch. Napoleon reached for a quill and dipped it into the inkwell, writing notes in the margin of the map, his handwriting swift yet deliberate. He paused to listen to the wind push against the tent, then reached for a piece of bread left on a small tin plate. He chewed slowly, his jaw tight with thought. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility, the lives, the choices, and then opened them with renewed clarity. He rose from the chair and walked to the small mirror propped against a supply crate. His reflection was tired but unbroken, his eyes sharp, the dark circles under them a testament to his focus. He adjusted his coat, smoothed his hair, and whispered softly to himself words of certainty, a habit known only to him. The narrator returned, teaching through the silence. True prosperity requires that you believe in your own vision before the world can see it, that you carry the weight of your dream until it becomes light. Napoleon returned to his maps, moved one marker slightly to the east, then another to the north, and felt the pieces align in his mind. He blew out the lantern, leaving only the faint light of the moon to touch the tent. And in that darkness, with nothing but his heartbeat and his thoughts, he felt the future bending gently toward him. The camp lay in a deep hush. The night sky stretched wide above, filled with 1,000 faint stars that trembled against the darkness. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet grass and smoke from the last dying campfires. Napoleon stepped out of his tent in silence, boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. He drew in a slow breath, letting the chill air fill his lungs, the weight of his coat heavy on his shoulders. He walked toward the edge of the camp, past the rows of tents where soldiers slept, their soft snores blending with the quiet whisper of the wind. He paused near a wooden fence, leaning one hand on the rough surface, and stared at the horizon where the faintest glow of dawn had not yet touched. His mind was alive with the images of the coming day. Lines of movement, the sound of drums, the rhythm of marching boots. He closed his eyes and saw it all unfold, as if it were already history. The narrator entered softly. Success is often created first in the unseen world, in the silent rehearsals of the mind. When you plant certainty deep in your heart, the world has no choice but to follow. Napoleon opened his eyes and looked toward a nearby tree, its branches swaying slightly, drops of dew glistening under the starlight. He walked to the tree and placed a hand on its trunk. Feeling its cold, rough texture, he thought of the roots beneath the earth, hidden yet powerful, holding it steady through storms, and he whispered to himself that he, too, must be rooted in his purpose. He walked slowly along the perimeter of the camp, his boots brushing against patches of wet grass. He noticed the faint glow of a lantern inside one tent, a soldier awake and writing a letter, and he felt a quiet warmth and the loyalty of those who followed him. He continued walking, passing the lines of cannons and stacked rifles, until he reached a small hill overlooking the valley where the morning battle would unfold. He climbed it slowly, each step sinking into the damp soil. And at the top, he paused, folding his hands behind his back. The valley stretched out like a dark, sleeping beast, mist hovering low above the ground. Napoleon whispered a single word into the wall. Night, victory, and the narrator returned once more. When you speak to life with calm conviction, when you hold the image of triumph, even in the dark, you bend reality toward your will. He stood on that hill for a long time, listening to the distant trickle of a stream, the soft rustle of leaves, and the slow, even rhythm of his own breathing. The night was long, yet he welcomed it, because every moment of solitude was another brick laid in the invisible foundation of the future he was building. He turned back toward the camp, his steps measured, his heart calm, ready to meet the dawn with unshakable focus. The first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, spilling soft gold across the misty valley. The air was still and cool, carrying the faint scent of earth and smoke. Napoleon stood on the small hill where he had spent the quiet hours of night, his eyes fixed on the fields below, where the sleeping mist rolled like a slow tide. He could hear the distant stirrings of the camp behind him, the muted clatter of metal as soldiers began to wake, boots on soft earth, whispers carried by the breeze. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened to the rhythm of the world, the heartbeat of the morning, the distant call of a bird, and the steady pulse of his own breathing. The narrator's voice entered softly. In life, prosperity is often built in the calm before movement, the moments when your mind aligns with your purpose and your actions follow with certainty. Napoleon opened his eyes and stepped down the hill, his boots leaving deep impressions in the damp soil. He walked through the camp slowly, watching men stretch, adjust their coats, rub sleep from their eyes, and silently check their weapons. The smell of fresh bread drifted from a small cooking fire where an officer heated rations. Napoleon paused, picked up a piece, and ate it slowly, each chew deliberate, his gaze never leaving the valley. He handed the rest to a young soldier who looked both surprised and grateful, and Napoleon gave him a small nod before moving on. He reached the line of horses, their warm bodies steaming against the cold air, the soft sound of their breathing filling the quiet morning. He ran a hand along the neck of his horse, feeling the smooth, damp hair under his fingers, and whispered a single word of calm. Together, he mounted and guided the horse to a higher ridge, where he could see the full expanse of the field. Mist was lifting now, revealing dark earth and patches of glistening water, as if the land itself was waking from a dream. The narrator spoke again. The world rewards those who are awake within, who can see clearly, not just with their eyes, but with their conviction. Napoleon breathed deeply, feeling the cool wind brush his face, and he pictured the day unfolding, step by step, victory by victory, brick by invisible brick, and he felt an unshakable peace settle into his chest. The morning sun rose higher, casting light across the soldiers now forming lines, their movements precise, quiet, and steady. He watched them with pride, knowing that each man carried a part of his vision, and that his own inner discipline had already planted the seed of the day's triumph. The narrator whispered once more, in life, as in battle, prosperity belongs to those who prepare in silence, believe in stillness, and move with clarity when the moment arrives. Napoleon sat tall in the saddle, the sun painting him in gold, and he felt the universe align with the calm force of his intent as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in deep shades of amber and violet. The last embers of the campfires glowed softly, and the night air settled over the valley. Like a calm blanket, Napoleon walked alone along the quiet ridge where he had begun his day. The cool breeze brushed against his face, carrying the faint scent of smoke, wet earth, and the distant murmur of soldiers settling into rest. He paused by a small tree, its branches swaying gently, and leaned against it, letting the weight of the day fall from his shoulders. His eyes traced the dark outlines of hills, the faint glow of the moon touching the misty edges, and he took a deep, slow breath, feeling the stillness of the world seep into him. The narrator's voice rose, soft and deliberate, in the quiet of your own life. When the day is done and the noise fades away, you hold the true power to shape your tomorrow. Prosperity begins in silence, in the choice to believe you are worthy, in the courage to notice that even the smallest step forward plants a seed for the future. Napoleon closed his eyes, listening to the soft crackle of a distant fire. He thought of the battles won and lost, of the dreams yet to be conquered, and he whispered to himself the lesson he had learned through years of discipline, focus, and unwavering belief that true wealth is not merely in gold or land, but in the mind that dares to see beyond the present moment. The narrator continued, "Tonight, as you rest, let this thought echo in your heart. You are the builder of your own empire, brick by invisible brick, with every grateful breath, every small decision, and every quiet act of belief. Abundance moves toward you, like rivers seeking the sea. Imagine now that the seeds of prosperity are already sprouting within your life. Even if you cannot yet see them, they are there, waiting, growing, aligning. Feel the peace of knowing that your future self thanks you for every thought of gratitude, for every moment of faith. Let that thought sink into the deep quiet of your mind. Let it guide your dreams tonight." The narrator's voice softened further, almost a whisper. "If you are still awake now, leave a comment saying, 'I am awake with Napoleon.' So I know you walk this journey with me. But if your eyes are heavy and your heart is calm, then allow yourself to drift into the safe silence of your own dreams. For tomorrow, another story awaits, and if you are awake, then let's begin another journey together, where your mind and your prosperity meet again." It was a soft, gray morning when Alina slowly opened her eyes. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant chirping of birds outside her window, blending into the calm start of the day. She was 45 years old and lived in a small but warm house in the suburbs, the kind of place where each corner held quiet memories. The old wooden floors creaked gently as she moved. But before leaving her bed, she stayed still for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, feeling the gentle weight of the blanket over her body. Her breathing slow and steady, the soft light of dawn leaked through the half-open curtains. She finally reached for her phone on the nightstand, turned off the alarm with a quiet tap, and let her hand rest for a moment, feeling the cool surface of the table. Then she pushed the blanket aside and placed her feet on the cold wooden floor. Shivering a little, she searched for her soft pink slippers with her toes and slipped them on. Then she stood, stretching her arms slowly, and walked toward the small bathroom down the hall. The mirror reflected her sleepy face, dark circles under her eyes, hair slightly messy, and she leaned closer. Studying herself quietly, she turned on the faucet. The water ran with a metallic hum before she splashed the icy freshness on her face. The sensation sent a wave of alertness through her. She took the toothbrush and brushed her teeth slowly, the sound echoing softly in the small space. While looking into her own eyes in the mirror, a quiet thought passed through her mind. Life had not gone exactly as she once imagined, and yet something inside whispered that it was not too late. She rinsed her mouth, dried her face with a white towel that smelled faintly of lavender, and then combed her hair with careful strokes. Watching each strand settle, she stood there for a moment, holding the comb, before the narrator's voice entered, calm and warm. Sometimes change begins not with a storm, but with a whisper, a thought that tells you there is more to life than you are living, that a new season waits for you if you choose to see it. Alina did not fully understand it yet, but this quiet morning was the first brick of a new foundation. She stepped back into her room, opened the curtains fully, and let the soft, golden light spill across her bed, the walls, the small desk in the corner where a half-finished journal lay with a pen resting on top. She walked to the kitchen, the faint smell of coffee from the automatic machine greeting her like a familiar friend. She reached for her favorite ceramic mug with a tiny crack near the handle, poured the steaming coffee, and held it with both hands. Feeling the warmth against her fingers, she leaned against the counter, watching through the window as the neighborhood woke up. A man walking his dog, a mother holding a child's hand, a cyclist gliding past on the wet street. The world moved, slowly, and for the first time in a long while. Alina allowed herself to simply watch it unfold. The narrator whispered again, prosperity often begins in the small moments. The quiet noticing of life, the gratitude for what is already here, and the decision to welcome more. Alina took a slow sip of coffee, the bitterness and warmth grounding her, and she smiled faintly, unaware that her quiet gratitude was already planting the seeds of change. Alina placed the empty coffee mug in the sink and rinsed it slowly, feeling the warm water against her fingers as she watched the steam rise and curl in the soft morning light. She left the mug upside down on the drying rack and walked to the small closet in the hallway, opening the wooden door with a faint creak. Inside hung her clothes in soft tones of beige, gray, and pale blue. She ran her fingers along the fabrics one by one, thinking for a moment. She chose a light gray sweater that felt soft against her skin, and a pair of dark blue jeans. She dressed slowly, buttoning the jeans with careful movements, feeling the cool metal button click into place. She slipped her feet into her sneakers, tying the laces in slow loops. She stood up straight and walked toward the living room, the sunlight now beginning to brighten the space, highlighting the small bookshelf in the corner, the stack of family photos on a wooden table, and the faint dust motes floating in the air. She paused by the window, watching as a neighbor waved to her while carrying a bag of groceries. Alina raised her hand in a shy greeting, her lips curling into a small smile. She walked to the front door and picked up her keys from the ceramic bowl on the small stand. The jingle of metal, a familiar sound, and she opened the door, stepping outside into the cool morning air, the scent of grass and distant rain filling her lungs. She took a deep breath, letting the freshness settle in her chest. She began to walk down the street, noticing the details she often ignored. The cracks in the sidewalk, the tiny weeds pushing through, the mailboxes lined up like silent guards, each holding the stories of different lives. She passed a garden where dew clung to rose petals, sparkling under the soft sunlight, and she felt an unexpected warmth in her heart, as if beauty had been waiting for her to notice. She reached the small park near her home, where a wooden bench faced a pond that reflected the sky. A few ducks glided over the still water, leaving ripples that slowly spread to the edges. Alina sat on the bench, resting her hands on her knees, her breathing steady. She watched an older man throwing small pieces of bread to the ducks and a young child laughing nearby. And in that quiet moment, the narrator's voice returned, soft and reflective. The world whispers its lessons in small, ordinary moments. It tells you that abundance begins with awareness, that gratitude opens the gates to unseen opportunities. Alina felt the truth of those words ripple through her. She did not yet know how her life would change, but she sensed a shift, a gentle alignment inside her. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, feeling the sun on her face, then opened them and stood, brushing off her jeans, ready to continue her slow walk. She passed by a bakery and caught the scent of warm bread and cinnamon, and something inside her softened even more. She pushed the door open, and the bell above chimed softly, the cozy interior wrapping around her like a hug. She ordered a small pastry and a tea, her voice quiet but steady. She carried her tray to a corner table by the window, savoring each bite, the flaky layers breaking softly under her teeth. She chewed slowly, watching life pass outside. And for the first time in many years, she felt that maybe life still held something beautiful just for her. The narrator whispered again, quietly, prosperity does not always rush in with noise. It starts with allowing yourself to feel worthy of the gentle gifts that life already offers. Alina finished her tea slowly, letting the moment stretch like a soft ribbon. And then she stood, walked outside, and began her journey back home, unaware that every small step, every breath of gratitude was reshaping the map of her future. Alina returned home slowly, her steps soft against the familiar sidewalk, each one making a faint sound on the concrete still damp from the morning dew. She paused at her front door for a brief moment, running her fingers along the smooth wood before turning the key and stepping inside. The apartment felt quiet, almost like it was waiting for her. She removed her sneakers and placed them neatly by the door, then walked barefoot across the cool floor, the sensation grounding her. She headed to the living room and noticed a soft ray of sunlight now stretching across the carpet. She followed it with her eyes until it touched the small plant on the windowsill, its leaves glistening as if they had just been washed. Alina walked to the plant and touched a leaf gently, feeling its smooth surface under her fingertip. She smiled faintly and whispered a small thank you, barely audible, as if sharing a secret with the universe. She then sat on the couch, leaning back, letting her head rest against the cushion, her eyes wandering across the room, taking in the old family photos framed on the wall. Her two children smiling in pictures taken years ago, their little hands sticky with ice cream in the summer sun. Her chest warmed with a quiet nostalgia. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slowly. hearing the distant hum of the city outside. And then the narrator's voice drifted in, soft and calm. Life's true wealth is often found in moments like these, the quiet pauses, the recognition of the simple gifts you already hold, and when you begin to honor them, more blessings quietly find their way to you. Alina felt a single tear slide down her cheek, not from sadness, but from the delicate sweetness of feeling alive. She opened her eyes and decided to tidy the house a little, not in a rush, but in a slow, deliberate rhythm. She picked up a blanket and folded it carefully, smoothing each edge with her hands. She placed it neatly on the arm of the couch, then dusted the coffee table, noticing the reflection of sunlight on the wood. She moved to the kitchen and washed the single plate from breakfast, feeling the warm water and the soft foam of the soap. The mundane task turning into a small meditation. She dried her hands on a towel and glanced out the window, watching a bird land on the railing of the balcony. Tilting its head as if observing her, she stood still, captivated by the fragile beauty of the moment. And then she whispered softly, almost like a prayer, "I am ready for better days." She didn't know why she said it, but it felt like an agreement with life itself. She walked to her bedroom and opened the window to let in the fresh air, the curtain fluttering gently in the breeze, carrying the faint scent of flowers from a nearby garden. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the fabric of the blanket beneath her hands, and took another deep breath. The narrator's voice returned, slow and soothing. Every time you pause to feel gratitude, you plant invisible seeds in the garden of your life. And though you cannot see them now, they will grow into opportunities and abundance if you keep nurturing them with faith and calm. Alina laid back on the bed for a few minutes, her eyes tracing the lines on the ceiling, her thoughts softening, her body relaxing. And for the first time in many years, she felt a quiet hope blooming inside her, small but steady, like a candle lit in a still room. The afternoon light filtered gently through the window as Alina rose from the bed, her body feeling lighter, as if a quiet strength had entered her bones. She stretched her arms slowly, her fingers reaching for the ceiling, and then let them fall softly to her sides. She walked barefoot down the hallway, the cool floor making her shiver just slightly, a reminder that she was fully present in her own life. She paused by a framed picture of her younger self holding her first child in her arms, her hair messy, her face tired, yet her eyes full of love and determination. She ran her fingers lightly over the glass and whispered a soft thank you to that version of herself, then continued to the kitchen where she decided to prepare a simple lunch. She opened the refrigerator slowly, scanning the shelves, and chose a few vegetables, a tomato, some lettuce, and a small block of cheese. She rinsed each item under cold water, listening to the sound of the stream, watching the drops slide across her hands, and she felt a strange gratitude even for that. She sliced the tomato carefully, each cut slow and precise, the vibrant red of the fruit bright against the wooden board, then arranged everything on a small plate and sat by the window to eat, chewing slowly, letting her mind drift. The narrator's voice entered again, soft as a breeze. Abundance is not always about more. Sometimes it begins with fully noticing and honoring what you already have. For when you feel rich in your heart, life has no choice but to mirror that wealth outside. Alina took a deep breath, letting those words sink in. She looked outside, watching a couple walking hand in hand under the soft sun, and a small dog wagging its tail with pure joy. She smiled faintly and took another bite. After lunch, she cleaned the dishes, the task done with gentle attention, and then she decided to take a short walk to the park nearby. She put on a light sweater and slipped into her sandals. Feeling the straps hug her feet, she stepped outside and was met by the fresh scent of cut grass, the soft rustle of leaves, and the distant laughter of children playing. She followed the familiar path to the park, passing by the corner bakery, where the smell of warm bread drifted through the air. Her pace was unhurried, her eyes catching the details she used to overlook. The small cracks in the pavement where tiny flowers had pushed through, the shadows of tree branches swaying gently on the ground. When she reached the park, she walked toward a bench under a large tree and sat down, the wood slightly cool against her legs. She leaned back and closed her eyes, listening to the sounds around her, the chirping of birds, the whisper of leaves, and the occasional distant bark of a dog. The narrator's voice returned, low and calm. When you slow down enough to listen, life speaks to you. It tells you that peace is wealth, gratitude is wealth, presence is wealth. And when you live in this quiet richness, opportunities begin to find you without effort. Alina opened her eyes and watched a little girl chase a butterfly, her laughter filling the air like music. She felt a deep warmth spread through her chest, a sensation she hadn't felt in years. She whispered softly to herself, "I deserve good things." And in that moment, she believed it a little more than she ever had before. As the afternoon turned to early evening, Alina remained on the park bench, watching the sky shift from soft blue to the delicate shades of peach and lavender. She traced the patterns of the clouds with her eyes, letting her mind wander freely, without the usual rush or the weight of endless worries. She inhaled deeply, the scent of earth and faint blossoms filling her senses, and she felt alive in a way that was both calm and exhilarating. Eventually, she rose from the bench, brushing her hands softly against her sweater, and began to walk toward the small pond at the center of the park. The gravel path crunched gently under her sandals, and she noticed the ripples on the water, reflecting the fading sunlight like liquid gold. A family of ducks glided gracefully across the pond, and she smiled faintly. Pausing to watch as the smallest duckling paddled behind the others, the narrator's voice entered softly, like a friend sitting beside her. Sometimes life feels like this pond, quiet on the surface, yet full of invisible movement underneath. The ripples of your thoughts travel far, shaping what comes to you. Choose thoughts of gratitude, of worthiness, of abundance, and watch how the surface of your life begins to shimmer with beauty. Alina let the words settle into her chest. She walked to a small bridge over the pond and leaned against the railing, watching the water swirl around the wooden supports. She imagined her worries dissolving into those ripples, carried gently away, leaving space for new possibilities. After a few moments, she turned and followed the path toward the exit of the park. The lampposts flickered on one by one, casting a warm glow along the sidewalk. She made her way back to the neighborhood streets, passing the bakery again, now closing its doors, and she caught the comforting smell of the last batch of bread cooling inside. Arriving at her home, she unlocked the door and stepped in, greeted by the soft stillness of her living room. She placed her sweater on the back of a chair and walked to the small kitchen, deciding to prepare a cup of tea. She filled the kettle and listened to the bubbling water, then poured it over a tea bag. Watching the color bloom through the cup like a slow-moving watercolor, she carried it carefully to the table. Cupping the warm mug in her hands, the narrator's voice returned, low and steady. Prosperity begins in these moments, when you choose to nurture yourself with gentleness. When you allow life to be simple and rich at the same time. When you believe that good things belong to you. Alina sipped the tea slowly, the warmth sliding through her body, and for the first time in many years, she felt not only hope, but also a soft certainty that her life could bloom in ways she hadn't yet imagined. She whispered again, "Thank you for everything I already have, and for everything that is on its way." Her eyes felt heavy, her body warm and relaxed, and the house filled with a quiet hum of evening as the soft light from the lamp cast gentle shadows across the walls. The night had settled quietly over Elena's neighborhood. The soft glow of streetlights flickered gently through her window as she finished the last sip of her tea. She felt the warmth settle deep in her chest, as if each swallow carried with it a quiet reminder that she was safe, cared for, and worthy of every gentle moment. She stood slowly, her bare feet pressing against the cool kitchen tiles, and she rinsed her cup under the tap, listening to the steady sound of the water. After placing the cup on the drying rack, she turned off the kitchen light and allowed the house to be lit only by the warm glow of a single lamp in the living room. The room looked calm and inviting, with her simple sofa, a folded blanket, and the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background. She walked over to the bookshelf in the corner, running her fingers along the spines of the few books she owned, and selected a small notebook instead. The cover slightly worn from years of sitting quietly, she opened to a blank page and held her pen for a long moment. Her handwriting was slow and careful as she wrote down a single sentence. "I am ready to receive the life I deserve." She stared at the words for a while, letting them sink into her mind. The narrator's voice emerged softly. "When you give your thoughts direction, your world quietly begins to align. Each word you speak to yourself is a seed. Plant the seeds of abundance and watch the invisible garden of your life bloom." Alina wrote a second sentence, this time smiling faintly. "I am grateful for every small joy today." She thought about the ducks in the pond, the warm cappuccino in the cafe, the little girl with the balloon she had passed on her walk, and her heart felt lighter. She closed the notebook gently and placed it on the small table by the sofa before draping the blanket over her shoulders and sitting down. The soft fabric hugged her as she leaned back and exhaled deeply. Outside, she could hear the faint chorus of crickets and the distant sound of a car passing on the wet street. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, feeling her body melt into the cushion. The narrator whispered again, "Prosperity comes quietly at first, not in loud gestures, but in the calm acceptance that you are enough and that life is ready to meet you where you are." She opened her eyes slowly and turned her gaze to the window, where the reflection of the lamplight overlapped with the night sky. And for a moment, she imagined the dark glass as a portal to the life she was stepping into, full of hope and possibilities. She whispered, "Thank you once more," this time almost like a lullaby to herself. Her breathing slowed as her thoughts softened, and the house, like her mind, settled into a deep and quiet peace. The house was completely quiet now. Only the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway marked the passage of time. Elena lay on her bed, her body sinking into the soft mattress, the white sheets cool against her skin. She turned her head toward the window where the moonlight painted a silver streak across the floor, and she let her eyes follow the line of light as it reached her closet and vanished into shadow. She felt a gentle calm spreading through her chest, her arms resting loosely at her sides, her breathing slow and steady. The narrator's voice appeared, soft and tender, like a friend leaning close to speak. You have walked through this day, noticing, feeling, breathing, and in every small act you have planted the seeds of a new life. Abundance begins here, in the quiet, when your heart is ready to receive. Your thoughts are the architects of your reality, the quiet builders of your future. Let each thought tonight be a brick of prosperity. Every grateful whisper, a foundation for the life you dream of. Elena closed her eyes fully now, and in her mind, she saw herself walking through an invisible garden, flowers blooming where she placed her steps, the air warm and fragrant, and every bloom whispered a single word. Worthy. She drifted deeper into the image, and the narrator continued, softly reprogramming her mind. As you rest now, your subconscious listens. It listens to the quiet truth that you are enough, that you are worthy of receiving, that prosperity flows toward you effortlessly, like rivers toward the sea. Every breath you take tonight is an invitation to abundance. Every exhale releases old doubts. Every heartbeat calls in opportunities unseen. Imagine your days unfolding with calm certainty, the right people arriving, the right ideas blooming, the right paths opening before you, because you are aligned, because you are ready. The seeds you planted today with your thoughts, with your small acts of gratitude, will grow while you sleep. They will take root in the fertile soil of your belief, and soon your life will bloom with blessings that feel both magical and natural. The narrator paused for a moment, letting the silence hold her in a soft embrace, and then asked gently, "Are you still awake? If you are, leave a comment saying I am ready to receive. And if your eyes are already heavy, let yourself drift into sleep, safe in the knowledge that abundance is already on its way to you. And if you are still with me, then stay, because another story is waiting, and it will guide you even deeper into the quiet garden of your dreams, where prosperity grows in the softest corners of your mind." It was a soft and pale morning when the first threads of sunlight slipped through the thin curtains of the small kitchen window, touching the edges of the wooden table that had seen years of family meals, laughter, and quiet thoughts. And in that house, in a calm neighborhood surrounded by the distant sound of birds, a 45-year-old mother named Eleanor slowly opened her eyes, her breathing slow and even, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall becoming the first rhythm of her day. She stayed there in bed for a few moments, feeling the weight of the blankets, the softness of the pillow beneath her head, and the coolness of the air that still carried the night's quiet. She blinked a few times, stretching her legs under the sheets, feeling the small pop of her joints and the slight comfort that came with waking up gently. Her feet searched for her worn slippers, the familiar touch of the soft fabric making her smile faintly as she slipped them on. She sat on the edge of the bed, leaning forward slightly, letting her arms hang for a second before slowly standing. And feeling her body adjust to the new day, she walked toward the bathroom, a soft pad of slippers against the wooden floor, almost like a whisper, and pushed the door open, switching on the light that filled the small space with a warm glow. She looked into the mirror and saw the familiar face staring back. The soft lines around her eyes, the faint shadows of tiredness, and the gentle spark of life that never quite left. She leaned closer, ran a hand over her cheek, and then turned on the faucet, letting the water run for a few seconds. Listening to its smooth and constant sound, she cupped her hands and splashed the cold water on her face, feeling a jolt of clarity. A fresh start washing over her, as if the droplets themselves carried a whisper of something new. She brushed her teeth slowly, counting the strokes in her head without thinking, and then combed her hair with deliberate care, watching each strand fall in place, noticing how even this simple act made her feel a bit more prepared for whatever the day would bring. She took a long breath, held it for a second, and let it out in a sigh that seemed to carry away the remnants of sleep. She turned off the light and returned to the bedroom, opening the curtains to let the golden morning light spill across the tidy room. Her bed now half unmade, the dresser holding a small ceramic dish with her rings, and the framed photo of her children when they were younger, smiling under the sun of a summer day long past. She touched the frame with a finger and whispered a quiet good morning to the memories, then headed to the kitchen, where the air already carried the faint scent of dried tea leaves and wooden cabinets warmed by the first sun. She opened the cupboard, and her eyes scanned the row of cups, each one with its own small history. The blue one her son loved, the white one with tiny flowers that reminded her of spring, the brown ceramic mug her daughter sometimes used for cocoa. She stood there for a moment, letting her fingers graze the handles. And in that simple act, an idea came to her, subtle and soft, like a leaf falling on water. What if she could hide her wishes here? Not grand declarations shouted to the world, but small, secret seeds planted in silence. She opened a drawer and took out a small notepad and a pen. The pen felt smooth and familiar in her hand. She tore a tiny square of paper and wrote in careful, round letters, "May our home be filled with peace and abundance." She folded it once, twice, and slipped it into the white cup with flowers. It disappeared inside like a little treasure. She stood still for a moment, feeling a quiet warmth bloom in her chest. The narrator's voice rose softly now, almost like the morning breeze. Sometimes prosperity begins with whispers, not with noise or rush. It begins with a thought, a word, a wish placed gently into the world. And like seeds in fertile soil, your small, sincere intentions grow where eyes cannot see. The voice faded, and Eleanor continued her quiet ritual, making tea in the kettle, the soft click of a switch, the gentle hum as it began to heat. She watched the steam start to rise and curl like delicate fingers toward the ceiling, the aroma of the tea leaves waking in the warmth. She prepared 3 cups, and in 2 of them, she slipped her little folded wishes. One said, "May new opportunities find us today." And the other said, "May I remember to smile at life." She placed the cups on the table, and as the kettle clicked off, she poured the water slowly, watching the liquid swirl over the paper, hiding it completely under the amber tone of the tea. She carried her own cup to the window, holding it with both hands to feel its warmth. She took a slow sip, letting the heat and flavor spread through her chest. And she smiled faintly as she looked outside, the street still quiet, a single man walking his dog, a soft breeze moving the leaves. She felt a calm she hadn't felt in a long time. And without thinking, she whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just a thank you to the morning, to the tea, to the chance of a new day. The narrator's voice returned, gentle as ever. When you give thanks for the smallest things, you water the seeds of unseen abundance. And though you do not yet see the garden, it begins to grow in the quiet places of your life. Eleanor did not know it, but this was the first morning of a habit that would slowly change everything. Not with grand gestures, but with small sips of intention. The next morning came with a soft drizzle, the kind that taps gently on the windows like a secret conversation between clouds and glass. And Eleanor woke to the subtle rhythm of rain. Her room dim but comforting, the air cool against her skin. She remained still for a few moments, feeling the soft heaviness of her blanket, the quiet around her like a protective shell. Only the occasional sound of a passing car breaking the stillness. She turned her head slightly toward the clock on the nightstand, its red numbers glowing 6:12, and she sighed, a long breath that seemed to release some part of yesterday she no longer needed. Slowly, she swung her legs off the bed, feeling her feet sink into the soft slippers waiting for her. And she rose with deliberate slowness, her body adjusting to the new day. She shuffled toward the bathroom, the floor cool beneath her steps, the faint smell of soap and eucalyptus still lingering from the shower she had taken the night before. She flicked on the light, squinting for a moment before leaning closer to the mirror. Her reflection seemed softer in the dim glow, a face framed by slightly messy hair, gentle lines around her mouth, and eyes that held the quiet stories of her life. She reached out and touched the glass lightly, as if greeting herself, then turned on the faucet, letting the water run and listening to its constant, calming sound. She cupped her hands and splashed the cool water onto her face, the shock of freshness pulling her fully into the moment. She brushed her teeth slowly, eyes half closed, focusing on the rhythm, the quiet hum of the electric toothbrush filling the small room. She combed her hair with patient movements, each stroke calming her mind, and then she dried her face with a towel, breathing in the faint scent of laundry soap. She switched off the light and walked to the kitchen. The sound of rain, softer now, but still present, a background music to her morning. She opened the cupboard and let her eyes travel over the familiar cups, running her fingers over the rims. And she thought of yesterday, of the little folded wishes resting in the cups, and how a warmth had bloomed inside her when she'd drunk her tea with that secret intention. She pulled out the small notepad again, tore a piece of paper, and wrote, "May joy find its way to our home," folding it into a small square, and slipping it into the blue cup her son loved. She wrote another, "May opportunities come as quietly as rain," and placed it in the brown ceramic mug. She paused, looking at the small white floral cup from yesterday, and smiled, writing simply, "Thank you for this life." And hiding it gently under the cup's rim, the narrator's voice appeared. "Now, soft as the rain outside, when you make gratitude a habit, you invite life to unfold like petals in sunlight, one by one, slowly but surely. And those who learn to thank before receiving always receive more than they expect. Eleanor let the words of the narrator echo in her mind as she filled the kettle with water. The soft splash against the metal, the click of the switch, and the low hum that followed. She set out 3 teaspoons of tea, 1 for each cup. The scent of the dried leaves, earthy and calming. She watched the kettle as steam began to rise, twisting in delicate shapes, fogging the window for a moment. She imagined her wishes dissolving into the air. Carried silently to the corners of the world, she poured the hot water slowly into each cup, listening to the soft hiss as it met the leaves, the amber color deepening as the paper slips disappeared into the warmth. She carried her cup to the small dining table and sat, holding the cup with both hands, the warmth soaking into her palms. She closed her eyes for a few seconds before taking the first sip, letting the liquid roll across her tongue, down her throat, and into her chest like a gentle hug. She stayed there, sipping, breathing, and watching the rain paint tiny rivers down the glass. Her children's footsteps began to echo in the hallway, sleepy murmurs of good morning filling the air. She watched as her son grabbed the blue cup, not knowing that a quiet wish rested at the bottom. He blew on the steam and took a sip, eyes still half closed, and she smiled, feeling like the universe itself had conspired to hold this soft moment together. The narrator whispered again, "Prosperity does." The next day began with a pale golden light that slipped through the thin curtains of Eleanor's bedroom, a soft warmth brushing her cheeks before her eyes had even opened. The faint sound of distant birds layering over the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She stirred slowly under the blanket, feeling the weight of comfort still holding her. Her breathing deep and steady, and for a few precious moments she simply stayed there, listening, noticing, letting the morning arrive inside her rather than rushing toward it. Finally, she opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling, the familiar cracks in the paint tracing silent paths that she had never followed this closely before. She turned her head and saw the clock, 6:04, and she whispered, "Soft, thank you," barely audible, for the day that had begun without asking for anything from her. Yet, she sat up slowly, a blanket sliding off her shoulders, cool air meeting warm skin, and her feet reached instinctively for her slippers, soft fabric greeting her toes. She stood and stretched her arms overhead, hearing the faint creak of her shoulders, feeling her spine lengthen, and she smiled faintly at the simple relief of the stretch. She shuffled into the bathroom, turning on the light with a soft click. Blinking against the brightness, she leaned toward the mirror. And for a moment, she simply looked at herself, the gentle shadows under her eyes, the faint lines that had been drawn by years of living and caring for others. She placed both hands on the cold edge of the sink and exhaled slowly, as if letting go of invisible weights. Then she turned on the water and watched it flow, a soft stream that caught the light and shimmered. She cupped her hands and splashed her face, the chill bringing her fully into the present. She brushed her teeth with slow, circular motions, the mint flavor waking her senses, and then combed her hair, pulling the brush through each strand like a quiet ritual. She dabbed her face with a towel, turned off the light, and made her way to the kitchen. The hallway, dim and peaceful, She passed the small wooden table where yesterday's wishes had been scribbled and smiled to herself. In the kitchen, the world felt alive, the refrigerator humming softly, the faint aroma of last night's tea still lingering in the air. She opened the cupboard and ran her fingers across the row of cups, the smooth ceramic cool under her fingertips, and she thought of what she wanted to plan today. She took the small notepad and wrote slowly, "Our home is a magnet for peace and wealth." Folding the paper into a tiny square, her movements deliberate, she chose the green mug, placing the wish inside, then tore another slip and wrote, "Every sip we take fills our hearts with quiet joy," and tucked it into the white cup. With the delicate blue flowers, finally, she held the brown cup and whispered as she wrote, "I am ready to receive all that life wants to give me," folding it gently and placing it inside. The narrator's voice drifted into the moment like a breeze. The act of writing your desire is like planting a seed in the soil of your mind. And when you water it with belief and patience, it will bloom in ways you cannot yet imagine. Eleanor smiled at this quiet truth as she filled the kettle, the sound of water splashing softly, and set it on the stove. The low flame glowing blue beneath the metal. She stood still for a moment, watching the flame dance, feeling its warmth on her face, and letting her mind wander to the possibilities of a day lived with intention. Steam began to rise, curling and twisting in delicate shapes, and she poured the hot water into the cups, the tea leaves swirling, releasing their earthy scent, the folded wishes sinking quietly to the bottom. She carried her cup to the small table and sat, hands wrapped around the warmth, taking a slow sip, feeling the liquid travel through her body like a message. She heard soft footsteps, and her daughter appeared, hair tousled, still half in dreams. She handed her the white floral cup without saying a word, and the girl smiled sleepily before taking a sip. The narrator spoke again. Prosperity is not something that arrives suddenly. It grows from the quiet attention you give to life, to the unseen rituals, to the moments where you pause and say yes to the now. Eleanor felt the words settle in her chest like a soft weight, a reminder, a promise. And she finished her tea in silence, watching a single droplet of water run down the window, carrying the reflection of the morning light all the way to the sill. She knew that every small act was weaving a new story for her life. One sip, one breath, one wish at a time. The afternoon unfolded with a gentle slowness that Eleanor had not felt in years. She stood by the kitchen window, her hands lightly resting on the counter, watching how the sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting soft patterns on the floor. The house carried the scent of chamomile and honey from the tea earlier. And somewhere in the background, a clock ticked steadily, marking time like a soft heartbeat. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly, savoring the stillness the living room called to her. So she walked barefoot across the cool tiles, feeling the contrast between the shaded floor and the warmth of the patches where sunlight had slipped in. She paused to straighten a small stack of books on the coffee table, running her hand along their covers, then sat down on the old beige sofa, sinking into the cushions as if the house itself wanted to hold her. On the side table was another mug, empty from the morning ritual. She picked it up and smiled at the thought of the wish folded quietly at its bottom, hidden yet already alive. In her mind, she stood and carried it to the sink, rinsing it under warm water. The sound of the stream filling the kitchen with a tender music. She dried the cup and placed it back in the cupboard. Each movement careful, deliberate, as if she were arranging more than just porcelain, as if she were arranging her life. The narrator's voice emerged softly. Prosperity grows in the homes where attention lives, where each act is a seed, and each pause is water for the roots of a dream. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment and let that settle. She could hear the faint laughter of her son from his room, the sound of a pencil scribbling on paper, and she imagined him drawing the life he dreamed of. Though he didn't yet know the power of his thoughts, she walked to her bedroom and opened the wardrobe. Her fingers grazing the fabric of dresses, jackets, and scarves, she chose a pale yellow cardigan, slipping it on slowly, feeling the gentle embrace of its softness. Then she sat on the edge of her bed, reached for the notebook she had left on the nightstand, and opened to a fresh page. The pen felt cool between her fingers as she began to write. One small intention at a time, I attract kindness and abundance into my life. She paused, wrote again. My family lives in peace and joy. The words curved across the page, like gentle waves, her handwriting slower than usual, more alive. She tore out the page and cut it into tiny slips, each phrase folded into a little secret waiting to bloom. She carried the slips back to the kitchen, choosing a pink cup, a cream cup, and a cup with faded golden edges, slipping the notes inside like soft whispers. She boiled more water. The sound of the bubbles rising was soothing, and she prepared the tea, inhaling the aroma that felt like comfort itself. She served the cups as her children joined her, each of them taking their seat without a word. The room filled with the quiet of shared presence. They sipped their tea, and she watched their faces relax as the warmth traveled through them. The narrator returned. When you teach your heart to notice blessings in small sips, you invite more blessings to find their way to your door. Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude wash over her, the kind that makes your chest feel full, yet light. She finished her tea, placed her cup down gently, and let her eyes wander to the window where the late afternoon sun painted the walls in soft amber. The day felt like a bridge between who she had been and who she was becoming. Step by step, sip by sip, a life blooming quietly into prosperity. Evening began to settle over the house like a soft blanket, the sky outside shifting from golden tones to muted lavender. And Eleanor moved quietly through the kitchen, her footsteps barely a whisper against the cool tiles. She reached up too, turned on the small lamp above the counter, its warm glow making the cups in the cupboard glimmer softly. She picked up one of the teacups she had prepared earlier with a folded wish inside. This time, a simple sentence, abundance flows to me effortlessly. And she set it carefully on the counter as she filled the kettle with fresh water. The metallic sound of the faucet echoing lightly in the quiet kitchen. As the kettle began to heat, Eleanor leaned against the counter and let her eyes wander across the familiar space. The table polished, the chairs slightly uneven on the floor, the small plant by the window catching the last light of day. She inhaled the faint aroma of chamomile from the cups they had used earlier, and her chest rose and fell with a long, slow breath. Upstairs, she could hear her daughter humming a soft tune while folding clothes. The hum of life within the house felt like a heartbeat, steady and calm. The narrator's voice drifted in like a slow wind. Prosperity visits the homes where love lingers in the details. where a quiet ritual becomes a signal to the universe that you are ready to receive. Eleanor closed her eyes and let that idea sink into her bones. The kettle whistled gently, and she poured the water into the cup, watching the steam curl upward like a ghostly dance. She sat at the kitchen table and held the cup in both hands, feeling its warmth spread into her palms and up her arms. She took a slow sip, the taste floral and soft, and imagined the wish dissolving into the tea, traveling into her body, into her heart, into every cell. She pictured abundance like light, flowing in streams around her, filling the house, filling her family. As she sipped again, she felt a small spark of joy rise in her chest, a joy that had no reason other than the fact that she allowed herself to be here, in this moment, with this warmth. She finished the tea slowly and rinsed the cup, leaving it upside down on a towel to dry. Then she wandered into the living room, turning on the small floor lamp, and the space filled with golden light. She sat on the sofa with a soft blanket over her legs and listened to the faint murmur of the city. Outside, cars passing like waves, someone laughing on the sidewalk, a dog barking in the distance. Her children soon joined her, one leaning against her shoulder, the other sitting cross-legged on the rug. And they spoke of little things, schoolwork and funny videos and weekend plans. The ordinary flow of life that felt extraordinary because she had slowed down enough to notice it. The narrator returned, speaking softly. Wealth is not always counted in numbers. Sometimes it is counted in the warmth of a room, the laughter of a child, and the awareness that this moment is enough. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, resting her cheek against her daughter's hair, and in that stillness she felt the invisible seeds of prosperity rooting themselves deeper into the soil of her life. Night had fully embraced the house now. The sky outside, a deep indigo, scattered with faint stars, and the soft hum of the refrigerator filled the quiet kitchen as Eleanor moved slowly, almost ceremonially, her bare feet making a soft sound against the cool tiles. She picked up the last clean teacup from the cupboard, one she had set aside earlier for her final ritual of the day, and she slipped a fresh wish into it. This one, written in her neat, deliberate handwriting. I am worthy of all the blessings I receive. She placed the cup gently on the counter and filled the kettle with water again. The sound of water rushing into metal, echoing softly in the stillness of the night. As the kettle heated, she leaned against the counter and watched the reflection of the small kitchen lamp on the shiny surface of the kettle. The glow seemed to pulse faintly, and she felt her own breathing begin to match that rhythm. Upstairs, she could hear the faint creak of a bed as her son turned in his sleep, and the soft ticking of the hallway clock became a lullaby for her thoughts. The narrator's voice drifted in with a calm tone. Abundance often comes to those who prepare. Space for it, a cup, a moment, a single breath of gratitude is enough to open the doors to a new life. Eleanor let her shoulders relax and whispered a quiet thank you into the empty kitchen, feeling the words vibrate softly in the air. The kettle gave a small whistle and she poured the steaming water into the cup, watching the paper wish bob gently. Before sinking under the heat, she sat down at the table, both hands wrapped around the warm porcelain. Letting the heat spread into her fingers and up her arms, the steam rose to touch her face, and with every sip she imagined the energy of the words dissolving into her. A soft, golden light filling her chest, clearing away the weight of old doubts. She could feel herself becoming lighter, as if every sip was rewriting a quiet story in her heart. She heard the faint wind outside brushing against the window, and she imagined it carrying her gratitude to the world beyond. Her breathing deepened, slow and steady, and the narrator whispered again, "You are building the invisible foundation of prosperity, brick by brick, thought by thought, sip by sip." Eleanor smiled faintly to herself and finished the tea, placing the cup in the sink without washing it, leaving the trace of her ritual in the air. She walked into the living room where the floor lamp glowed softly and lay back on the sofa, the blanket pulled up to her chin. She listened to the soft breathing of her children upstairs and the quiet rhythm of her own heart. And in that moment, she felt a complete and silent alignment with the life she was calling toward herself. A life where abundance did not arrive with noise, but like steam rising from a cup, gentle, warm, and certain. Eleanor drifted into the last moments of her day, the house silent except for the soft ticking of the hallway clock and the distant hum of the street outside. She remained on the sofa, the blanket warm against her skin, and her eyes half closed as she listened to the whispers of her own breathing. Slow and gentle, she thought of the many cups she had filled with wishes, the quiet ritual that had become the rhythm of her life. She imagined the paper dissolving into golden light, flowing through her home like an invisible river, touching her children's dreams, touching her own future, and in that stillness the narrator's voice returned, smooth and calm like a lullaby. Abundance begins in the smallest moments. In the sip of warm tea, in the thank you whispered to no one, in the decision to believe that you are worthy. Every day you choose to see beauty where it hides. You water the seeds of your own prosperity. Eleanor felt the words sink into her as though her whole body was listening. Her fingers relaxed, her jaw softened, and her breathing grew heavier. The narrator continued, "Prosperity is not a distant dream. It is a quiet companion that appears when you open the door. It walks slowly into your life through gratitude, presence, and the courage to imagine something better. Tonight, as you rest, your mind is planting these seeds deep within. Every thought of thankfulness, every image of a life you love is a seed that will bloom in ways you cannot yet see as your body drifts into sleep. Your subconscious is working for you, opening doors, calling opportunities, welcoming blessings that already belong to you. You are safe, you are supported, and you are worthy of all that is good. Let each breath carry away the old stories of doubt and lack, and let each new breath fill you with quiet confidence that life is arranging itself in your favor, even now. In your dreams, the invisible garden of your life is blooming, golden and abundant, slowly and surely. And as you drift deeper, I wonder, are you still awake? If you are, leave a comment saying you are still here with us, still listening, still breathing in this quiet promise of abundance. And if your eyes are heavy and your mind is soft, let the sleep take you. Let the dreams carry these new truths into every corner of your being. And if by some chance you are still awake, then let us go into another story together, because your journey to prosperity is only beginning.